My name is Victoria Hill, 28 years old, the sole heiress to the Hill Enterprises tech empire in Silicon Valley. As I stood in the grand ballroom of our San Francisco estate, adjusting my white lace gown, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement mixed with nerves. Today was my wedding day to Barrett Harris, the man who had swept into my life like a whirlwind, promising love and partnership despite my deafness. Little did I know, as I lip-read the vows and signed the marriage certificate, that this day would mark the beginning of the most elaborate betrayal I'd ever face, and my path to reclaiming everything. Hill Enterprises was founded by my parents, Garrett and Elena Hill, in the early 2000s. What started as a small software startup in a garage had grown into a $500 million company, specializing in cloud-based data security solutions. My father, a visionary coder, and my mother, a sharp business strategist, built it from scratch, serving clients from Fortune 500 companies to government agencies. But a tragic car accident 5 years ago left me orphaned and in charge, navigating the world without sound. I relied on lip reading, sign language, and my sharp instincts to run the company, but it was lonely. That's when Barrett appeared. We met at a tech conference in New York. He was charming, ambitious, the VP of operations at a rival firm. He learned basic sign language just for me, and his persistence won me over. "Victoria, your deafness doesn't define you," he'd say, his eyes full of what I thought was genuine affection. "I love you for your mind, your strength." Within months, he proposed, and I agreed, seeing him as the partner who could help shoulder the burden of the company. He even quit his job to join Hill Enterprises as COO, working tirelessly, or so I believed. As the ceremony ended, I noticed Barrett whispering urgently to his mother, Mrs. Lydia Harris, a sharp-tongued socialite from old Boston money. I couldn't hear, of course, but their body language was off, tense, excited. Then, in the bridal suite, as I prepared to sign the share transfer agreement giving him 50% of Hill Enterprises, something shifted. After the vows, when I truly discovered the truth. As guests mingled, I stepped outside for air and saw Barrett and my best friend Natalie. Yes, Natalie Reed, my confidant since college, huddled in the garden. Natalie, with her perfect blonde hair and designer dresses, had been my rock, helping with everything from board meetings to personal advice. But as I approached silently, I read their lips. Once she signs the agreement, I'll have her removed. I've been with this deaf girl for these shares. It's disgusting. Barrett's words hit like a punch. Natalie laughed. "You promised I'd be your wife. Don't forget." My world shattered. I could see their mouths moving clearly. Years of lip reading had made me an expert. They thought I couldn't hear or see, but I could interpret every cruel syllable. Heart pounding, I backed away, pretending nothing happened. Inside, rage built. How had I been so blind? Barrett wasn't in love. He was a gold digger, scheming with Natalie to take my company. Hill Enterprises wasn't just business. It was my parents' legacy, my life. I faked a smile through the reception, toasting with champagne while plotting my first move. That night, as Barrett carried me over the threshold of our lavish honeymoon suite at the Fairmont in San Francisco, the city's twinkling lights reflecting off the bay through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt a wave of nausea that wasn't entirely feigned. The room was opulent, silk sheets on the king-sized bed, a bottle of vintage champagne chilling in a silver bucket, rose petals scattered like confetti across the marble floor. But my mind was racing, replaying the lip-read conversation I'd witnessed in the garden earlier. "I'm not feeling well," I signed, my hands trembling slightly for effect as I gestured toward my stomach. Barrett's face tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his handsome features, the chiseled jaw and piercing blue eyes that had once made my heart skip. He nodded curtly, masking his disappointment with a forced smile, and set me down gently on the edge of the bed. As he turned to pour himself a drink, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the glass a little too hard. He fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's festivities, or perhaps from the weight of his secrets. I waited until his breathing deepened into soft snores, the rhythm steady and unsuspecting. Slipping out from under the covers, I padded silently across the plush carpet to the balcony, the cool night air brushing against my skin. My phone was clutched in my hand, screen dimmed to avoid waking him. I texted my lawyer, Elena Vargas, a trusted ally who'd handled my parents' estate after the accident. Delay the share transfer indefinitely. Cite health concerns. Urgent. Her response came swiftly. Done. What's going on? I didn't elaborate. Not yet. I'd already postponed the signing earlier that day, framing it as a romantic gesture to make the moment more special, perhaps during our honeymoon in Hawaii. Barrett had bought it, eager as he was. But the real twist, the one that turned my world from silent shadows to a symphony of revelations, had happened amid the wedding chaos. As the reception wound down, a spectacular firework display lit up the sky, bursts of red, gold, and blue exploding in rhythmic booms. I'd been standing on the terrace, watching the colors reflect in the guests' upturned faces, when I felt it. A strange pop in my ears, like pressure releasing from a sealed bottle. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue. But then, faint sounds began filtering in, the muffled crackle of the fireworks, the distant laughter of guests, the clink of glasses. It grew clearer with each passing minute, sharpening into distinct noises, a woman's high-pitched giggle, the low hum of conversation. By the time we reached the suite, the world was alive with audio I'd long forgotten. My deafness, stemming from a severe meningitis infection at age 10, had defined my life, teaching me resilience, honing my observational skills. Doctors had said it was permanent, nerve damage irreversible. Yet here it was, miraculously reversed, perhaps triggered by the atmospheric pressure change from the explosions, or the sheer adrenaline surging through my veins from the day's emotional whirlwind. Whatever the cause, I kept it hidden, a secret ace up my sleeve. In a world where everyone assumed I was oblivious, hearing would be my ultimate weapon. The following days blurred into a haze of calculated pretense, a delicate dance of deception in our sprawling Pacific Heights mansion. Barrett ramped up his pressure for the share transfer during breakfast at our sunlit kitchen island, where he'd prepare elaborate omelets as if to butter me up. "For our future, Victoria," he'd say, his voice smooth and persuasive, leaning in so I could read his lips easily. Half the company to me means we're true equals, partners in every sense. I'd nod demurely, signing back with feigned enthusiasm, all while my mind whirred like the servers at Hill Enterprises. Inside, I was a storm of investigation. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd slip into my home office, a sleek room lined with monitors and encrypted drives. Using my tech expertise, honed from years coding alongside my father, I hacked into Barrett's personal email through a backdoor vulnerability in his phone's sync. What I uncovered chilled me, a chain of messages with a mysterious mentor named Douglas Lee, an old business associate of my parents who'd vanished to Europe a decade ago after a falling out over expansion strategies. "The deaf heiress is hooked," one email sneered. "She's signing over soon. Once I have the shares, we eliminate her, make it look like an overdose or accident." Douglas's replies were cold and clinical. "Good. Hill Enterprises should have been mine. Finish the job." My hands shook as I scrolled, piecing together their plot. Douglas, resentful of my parents' ethical stance that blocked his aggressive acquisitions, had orchestrated this long con. Barrett was his pawn, seducing me for access. I confronted nothing outright, biding my time like a chess master. Instead, I struck at a company gala 2 weeks later, held at the D. Young Museum amid glittering art installations and Silicon Valley elite. Barrett stood beside me on the stage, beaming with false pride in his tailored tuxedo. As the spotlight hit us, I announced my surprise donation with a steady voice, though I signed simultaneously for emphasis. In honor of our marriage and the legacy of Hill Enterprises, I'm donating half my shares to the Silicon Valley Tech Education Fund, empowering underprivileged youth in STEM. The crowd erupted in applause, flashes from phones and cameras lighting up the room like stars. Barrett's smile froze, his face draining of color to a ghostly ashen. Later, in a private alcove amid the exhibits, he cornered me, hissing through clenched teeth. "What do you mean? Weren't you supposed to give it to me? This ruins our plans." "I'm doing this for you," I signed innocently, my expression the picture of wide-eyed sincerity. After all, bad deeds can lead to hell. Better to build good karma. His eyes widened in a flash of paranoia. Did he suspect I knew more than I let on? No, he couldn't possibly. He still saw me as the deaf, clueless heiress, vulnerable and easily manipulated. That night, back home, I lay awake, ears attuned to every creak. I heard him sneaking out to meet Natalie in the garden, their voices carrying on the breeze. "That butch donated the shares, but we still have a plan. Douglas says we push harder, eliminate obstacles." Little did they know, with my hearing restored and evidence mounting, the game had just begun. I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter, ready to dismantle their empire piece by piece. Waking up to the sound of birds chirping outside our bedroom window was nothing short of surreal. For over a decade, since that childhood fever stole my hearing at age 12, silence had been my constant companion, a isolating barrier that forced me to rely on lip reading, vibrations, and the subtle cues of body language to navigate the world. It sharpened my other senses, turning me into an observer of the unspoken, a fleeting glance, a tense shoulder, a forced smile. But now, with my hearing miraculously restored, perhaps triggered by the explosive fireworks at the wedding or the sheer surge of adrenaline from discovering Barrett's treachery, every whisper, every rustle of sheets, every distant car horn filtering through the San Francisco fog was a revelation. It felt like emerging from an underwater world into the crisp air above. And more importantly, it became my secret weapon in this unfolding war for survival. I kept up the act meticulously, pretending my deafness remained unchanged while I eavesdropped on Barrett and Natalie's increasingly frantic late-night rendezvous in the guest house at the edge of our estate. The guest house was a modern glass and steel structure my parents had built for visiting executives, overlooking the bay with floor-to-ceiling windows that now served as my unintended vantage point. I'd slip out under the cover of darkness, hiding in the manicured hedges, my heart pounding as I strained to catch their words. "She's ruining everything," Natalie whined one humid evening, her voice carrying on the breeze like a venomous hiss. She paced the sleek living room, her high heels clicking against the polished concrete floor, while Barrett lounged on the leather sofa, swirling a glass of scotch. "You said once we got the shares we'd oust her and take over. But that donation? It's like she knew." Barrett's response was a low growl, laced with frustration. He slammed his glass down on the coffee table, the ice clinking sharply. "Don't worry. She's an orphan now. No parents to interfere, no one to question. We'll drug her, make it look like an accident. A fall down the stairs, perhaps, or a tragic overdose on her medications." My blood ran cold as I crouched there, the damp grass soaking through my pajamas. They weren't just after the company. They wanted me erased entirely, wiped from the boardroom and the world. Hill Enterprises wasn't merely a business to me, it was the culmination of my parents' dreams, a tech fortress built on innovation and integrity. My father, Garrett, with his endless late nights coding algorithms for unbreakable data encryption, my mother, Elena, negotiating deals with venture capitalists in boardrooms dominated by men. Losing it to these vipers? Unthinkable. Flashback to how their scheme had infiltrated my life. After my parents' accident on that rain-slicked highway 5 years ago, the company had teetered on the brink of collapse. Shareholders panicked as stock prices plummeted 30% overnight. Whispers of hostile takeovers echoing through the halls of our headquarters in downtown San Francisco. I was thrust into the CEO role at 23, fresh out of Stanford with a degree in computer science, but grieving and disabled in a world that equated silence with weakness. Barrett appeared, miraculously, at a charity gala hosted by the Tech Inclusion Foundation, his tailored suit and easy charm drawing me in. He learned basic American Sign Language, ASL, in weeks, signing compliments like, "Your vision for AI-driven security is groundbreaking." Natalie, my supposed best friend from college, where we'd bonded over late-night study sessions in the dorms, encouraged it all. "He's perfect for you, Victoria. He doesn't mind your disability. He sees the real you." Now, in hindsight, it was a calculated infiltration, a Trojan horse designed to breach my defenses. Determined to fight back, I began gathering evidence in secret. Using Hill Enterprises' state-of-the-art secure servers, accessible only through biometric scans in my home office, I traced subtle financial anomalies that had nagged at me for months. Small transfers, disguised as consulting fees, funneled to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, linked back to Barrett's personal email. One night, as he thought I was deeply asleep under the Egyptian cotton sheets, I heard him on an encrypted call in the adjoining study. "Douglas, the plan's in motion. Once she's out, the company is ours. I've siphoned another $2 million, enough to cover the buyouts." Douglas Lee, my parents' former business partner, exiled to Europe after a heated board dispute a decade ago. I'd vaguely remembered him from childhood photos, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, always pushing for aggressive mergers. Old company emails, archived on our cloud, revealed the rift. "Douglas is too ambitious," my father had written. "We can't risk unethical expansions. Swallowing startups whole goes against our values." Douglas had wanted to dominate the market by any means. My parents prioritized ethical growth, fostering partnerships instead. So he harbored a grudge, plotting from afar. To deepen my probe, I accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on Barrett's laptop during dinner one evening. A calculated mishap over our marble dining table, lit by the chandelier's soft glow. "Oh no," I signed dramatically, feigning horror as the Cabernet soaked the keys. While he stormed off to shower, cursing under his breath, I connected it to my secure drive and hacked in. The files were a goldmine, encrypted messages confirming Douglas's orchestration of the car crash. "Brakes tampered? Clean job by the mechanic we hired," one read. "Ensure Victoria misses the hospital. Delay her flight." My parents hadn't died instantly in the wreckage. They'd lingered in the ICU for hours. Their final words, a plea for me. But Barrett had intercepted the call from the hospital, fabricating a meeting delay to keep me in New York. Tears streamed down my face as I copied the data to a hidden USB, the weight of betrayal crushing. Rage fueled my every move, but I confided in no one, until fate intervened. An encrypted email pinged my secure inbox late one night. "Sis, it's Dylan. I'm alive, been investigating abroad. I know the truth about Mom and Dad." My brother Dylan, presumed missing after vanishing in grief post-accident, had been in hiding, piecing together the puzzle from contacts in Europe. At 25, he was leaner, hardened by years on the run, his once boyish face now shadowed by a beard. We met secretly in a dimly lit cafe in Oakland, away from prying eyes, the aroma of fresh espresso masking our tension. "Victoria, they harmed our parents for the company," he signed urgently, his hands trembling. I revealed my restored hearing in a whisper. "I can hear now, Dylan, and I have a plan." His eyes widened in shock, then resolve. Together we plotted meticulously. First step, introduce Dylan as a surprise shareholder at an upcoming board meeting to disrupt Barrett's insidious takeover bid. The boardroom showdown was electric. Perched at the head of the long oak table in our glass-walled headquarters, with the San Francisco skyline sprawling below, Barrett announced smugly, "As COO, I'm proposing a full restructure. Victoria's condition makes decisive leadership challenging. We need fresh direction to compete in this AI-driven market. Shareholders, A mix of venture capitalists in crisp suits and tech veterans with laptops open nodded along, many already bought off with promises of bonuses. Then Dylan burst through the double doors, his presence commanding, "Objection! As Garrett Hill's son, I hold 25% shares, inherited but hidden in a trust for safety during the investigation." The room erupted in murmurs. Barrett's face drained of color, his knuckles white on the podium. "Who the hell are you?" "My brother," I signed calmly, lip-reading the collective shock rippling through the executives. Later that evening, Barrett confronted me in our opulent living room, the fireplace crackling falsely warmly. "Why bring him back now? This ruins everything we've built." I feigned wide-eyed innocence, signing back with steady hands, but overheard him muttering to Natalie on the phone afterward, "We need to eliminate Dylan, too. He's a loose end." That night, their desperation manifested. Dylan was ambushed on his way home from the office, a black SUV ramming his car on the winding roads of the Presidio. But we'd anticipated it, equipping him with a reinforced vehicle and a tracking device. He faked a minor injury, escaping into the shadows while the attackers fled. "They're getting sloppy," he texted me from a safe house. I nodded to myself in the mirror, my reflection steely. The noose was tightening, but the real battles, the attempts on our lives and the unmasking, were just beginning. With Dylan back in my life after years of absence, the entire dynamic of our household and the company shifted like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. No longer was I the isolated heiress, pretending to navigate a silent world while secretly hearing every treacherous whisper. Dylan, my younger brother, had changed during his time away. Tougher, more street-smart from his investigations in Europe, where he'd pieced together fragments of our parents' death. His return wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. We met in hidden spots around San Francisco, like foggy parks at dawn or nondescript coffee shops in the Mission District, where we could sign and speak without fear of eavesdroppers. "We've got to play this smart, Victoria," he signed one morning over steaming lattes. "Barrett and his crew are watching every move." Barrett and Natalie, sensing the threat, grew increasingly paranoid. Their tests started small, almost innocuous, but I could hear the malice in their voices. One evening, as I pretended to nap on the plush leather couch in our living room, overlooking the Bay Area skyline, they staged their first probe. I had positioned myself strategically, eyes closed but ears attuned to the slightest sound. Natalie hissed from the kitchen, her voice sharp like a knife edge. "She's faking it all, Barrett. That deaf act? It's too convenient now that Dylan's here." Barrett chuckled lowly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Let's see if she reacts. Watch this." He deliberately knocked over a crystal glass from the counter, letting it shatter against the marble floor with a deafening crash. Shards scattered like diamonds under the recessed lighting. My heart raced, pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to remain still, breathing evenly as if in deep sleep. Inside, I was cataloging every detail, the way Natalie's heels clicked nervously, Barrett's muttered curse under his breath. They waited, tense, for any twitch from me. When none came, Natalie sighed in relief. "See, she's clueless. We can proceed." But they didn't stop there. Their suspicions festered, leading to more elaborate traps. Barrett, ever the charmer on the surface, gifted me a custom video compilation one afternoon in our home office, a room filled with sleek monitors and shelves of tech prototypes from Hill Enterprises. "I put this together for your birthday next week," he signed with feigned warmth, his eyes scanning my face for reactions. The video was a montage of old family footage, my parents laughing at holidays, Dad tinkering with early software code in our garage startup days, Mom negotiating deals with her signature poise. But embedded in it was the real test, audio clips from the accident scene, pulled from police records or recreated. I wasn't sure. As the video played on my tablet, the sound blared through hidden speakers. "Brakes aren't working. Someone tampered with them." followed by my parents' desperate voices calling out, "Victoria! Dylan!" It was a cruel psychological jab, designed to provoke an audible gasp or flinch if I could hear. I let tears well up, signing back, "I miss them so much, thank you for this." But internally, I seethed. The video confirmed what Dylan had uncovered. The breaks had been sabotaged, and their final calls had been deliberately withheld from us. That night, I pored over the file metadata on my secure laptop, tracing it back to Douglas Lee's IP address in London. He was pulling strings from afar. Meanwhile, tensions peaked at Hill Enterprises' San Francisco headquarters. In the glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Barrett pressed for control. Enter Douglas Lee, the puppet master, who returned from Europe under the guise of a benevolent savior. He arrived at the next board session, a silver-haired man in his 60s, with a tailored suit and a disarming British accent, shaking hands like an old friend. "I've been away too long," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "But seeing the company my dear friends Garrett and Elena built in peril, I had to help stabilize it." I pretended gratitude, signing effusively while noting the flicker of triumph in his eyes. In reality, I knew from Dylan's intel that Douglas had been exiled years ago for pushing unethical acquisitions, swallowing startups through aggressive tactics my parents deemed predatory. Now, he posed as my ally, but his late-night calls with Barrett, which I overheard through a bugged phone line, installed discreetly with Dylan's help, revealed the truth. Frame the brother for embezzlement. Make it stick. They executed the plan flawlessly at first. Forged documents appeared, showing massive asset transfers overseas, millions siphoned to Cayman accounts, with Dylan's signature imitated to perfection using AI forgery tools Barrett had access to from our own R&D lab. The board erupted in outrage during an emergency session. "Dylan's stolen millions. This could bankrupt us." Shareholders demanded immediate repayment, their voices echoing off the glass walls. I reluctantly agreed to reclaim the shares under company bylaws, signing the papers with a steady hand while secretly, in our hidden war room, a rented apartment in Oakland, Dylan and I traced the funds. Using Hill Enterprises' proprietary tracking software, we linked the accounts straight back to Douglas's shell companies in Switzerland. "Got them," Dylan whispered triumphantly as the data loaded on our screens. Natalie, meanwhile, suffered a humiliating demotion in my subtle counterattack. Under the pretense of streamlining household staff, I reassigned her from best friend confidant to essentially a maid, making her handle menial tasks like laundry and cleaning our expansive estate. Her resentment boiled over. I heard her complaining bitterly to Barrett in the pantry one night, "Why make me scrub floors? This is beneath me." Their plotting intensified. I caught her spiking my evening milk with sedatives, whispering, "Drug her again. Make her pliable." I switched the glasses when she turned away, watching from the shadows as she accidentally drank it herself, slurring her words in panic before passing out on the couch. The climax of these tests unfolded at a tense family dinner in our dining room, candlelight flickering on crystal stemware and plates of gourmet salmon from a local chef. Barrett accidentally knocked over a pot of hot oil while helping in the kitchen, the sizzling liquid arcing toward me. I dodged instinctively, the heat grazing my arm, and signed, "Clumsy me, must be tired." But his eyes narrowed. He whispered to Douglas later in the study. She heard the sizzle. "She's not deaf anymore." That suspicion sealed their next move, planning my accident, a rigged drive to the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, where the roads twisted dangerously. Little did they know, we'd bugged the car and alerted authorities. The traps were closing, but so were ours. The subtle shift from suspicion to outright danger began almost imperceptibly, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. After Dylan's dramatic return and our initial victories in disrupting Barrett's boardroom maneuvers, I sensed the air in our sprawling Silicon Valley home thickening with malice. Barrett's smiles grew tighter, his touches more calculated, and Natalie's eyes, once feigning sisterly concern, now darted with barely concealed venom. I continued my charade of deafness, but with my hearing fully restored, every whispered conversation became a weapon in my arsenal. It was during these tense days that the first attempt on my life unfolded, disguised as an act of care. It started with the medicine. Barrett had always been the one to prepare my evening tonic, a ritual he'd insisted on since our early dating days. "For your health, dear," he'd sign with that disarming grin, handing me a glass of milky liquid he claimed was prescribed by a specialist for my nerves. In truth, I'd never questioned it before. Why would I? He was my husband, my partner in Hill Enterprises. But now, armed with knowledge of his betrayal, I watched him closely. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rolling hills visible from our kitchen window, he stirred the concoction with unusual focus. I pretended to be engrossed in a company report on my tablet, but I heard the faint clink of a vial being opened, saw the powdery residue he quickly wiped away. "Here you go, Victoria," he signed, placing the glass before me. His eyes lingered a second too long, searching for any sign of hesitation. I nodded gratefully, lifting it to my lips, but instead of drinking, I spilled a drop on my sleeve, testing. Later, in the privacy of my bathroom, I poured the rest down the sink and flushed it away. That night, feigning sleep, I heard him creep back into the room, checking my breathing. "She's out," he murmured into his phone. "The dose should work by morning. Make it look like an overdose, natural causes." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I remained still, a statue in the darkness. The next day, I woke groggy, signing complaints of a headache to sell the act. Barrett's relief was palpable. He thought his poison had weakened me, not knowing I'd evaded it entirely. But subtlety gave way to escalation. A few days later, the car incident unfolded, echoing the nightmare that had claimed our parents. Dylan and I had planned a discreet meeting at a neutral cafe in Palo Alto to review the forged documents we'd uncovered, evidence of Barrett siphoning funds to Douglas Lee's offshore accounts. I drove my sleek black Tesla, a company perk equipped with the latest autopilot features. As I merged onto the highway, the brakes felt spongy at first, then utterly unresponsive. The pedals sank to the floor, and panic surged as cars blurred past. Not again, I thought. Flashbacks assaulting me, the police report on Mom and Dad's crash, the tampered lines, the skid marks on that rainy road 5 years ago. Gripping the wheel, I downshifted frantically, using the emergency brake and autopilot to veer onto the shoulder. The car shuddered to a halt inches from a guardrail, smoke rising from the tires. Trembling, I called Dylan via voice-to-text, ironic, now that I could hear. They cut the brakes, like Mom and Dad. He arrived within minutes, his face ashen. We'd suspected this, so we'd prepared. Earlier that day, we'd swapped vehicles in a secure garage. The rigged car was actually one of Barrett's decoys, meant for me but driven by Dylan briefly to bait them. Sure enough, Barrett's hired goons, 2 burly men in a nondescript van, crashed while tailing us, their vehicle flipping in pursuit. Police sirens wailed as we watched from afar. "Amateurs," Dylan muttered, but the attempt confirmed. They were willing to make us disappear, just as they had with our parents. Douglas Lee's involvement deepened the horror. From his luxurious suite in a downtown hotel, funded, I later learned, by embezzled company money, he orchestrated the next phase. I overheard a late-night call Barrett took in his study, the door ajar just enough for me to lip-read and listen. "Take her down at the villa," Douglas barked, his voice gravelly with age and ambition. "We can't risk her and that brother digging deeper. Make it clean. Push her off the cliff during a romantic walk." Barrett hesitated, but greed won out. "Fine. Tomorrow night." The villa was our weekend retreat in Big Sur, perched on rugged cliffs overlooking the Pacific, a place I'd once loved for its isolation, now a potential death trap. I played along, signing excitement about a getaway to reconnect amid the company stress. We drove down the winding coastal highway, the ocean crashing below like a symphony I could finally hear. Barrett's knuckles whitened on the wheel, his small talk forced. Arriving early under the pretense of preparing a surprise dinner, I hid in the upstairs closet, phone recording audio and video. They arrived, Barrett, Natalie, and 2 thugs. "The deaf fool won't suspect a thing," Barrett sneered, pouring wine laced with sedatives. "We'll walk her to the edge, a little shove, and it's over. Accident. Grieving widow slips." Natalie laughed. "Finally, I get to be Mrs. Harris for real." Their confession poured out. Details of the embezzlement. What happened to our parents. Douglas's master plan. My hands shook as I captured it all, the waves outside mirroring my inner turmoil. When they discovered me napping, I woke, drowsily, signing confusion, but Dylan, tipped off, had alerted authorities. As Barrett led me toward the cliff, sirens blared. The thugs fled. Barrett and Natalie froze. "How?" he stammered. I signed nothing, but whispered, "I heard everything." His face crumpled, the first crack in his facade. Natalie, ever the opportunist, tried a different angle, seduction on Dylan to sow discord. Posing as a concerned friend, she invited him to a bar, her dress low-cut, her words honeyed. "Barrett's using you both," she cooed, thinking I couldn't hear her recorded call. But Dylan, wired with a hidden mic, captured her admissions. "Barrett promised me the luxurious life, the houses, the yachts. Once Victoria's gone, it's ours." We used the tape to partially turn her, feeding her false info to disrupt their plans. She played double agent briefly, but her loyalty was fickle. As Dylan and I delved deeper into the tangled web of deceit surrounding Hill Enterprises, the pieces of the puzzle began to form a horrifying picture, one that pointed directly to the cold-blooded crime against our parents. It started with a nagging inconsistency I'd noticed in the official reports. The accident that claimed Garrett and Elena Hill's lives had always been described as a tragic brake failure on a rainy San Francisco night, en route to a late business meeting. But as I pored over the digitized files late one evening in my home office, the glow of the computer screen illuminating my determined face, something didn't add up. The autopsy report we'd received 5 years ago listed the time of death as immediate upon impact. Yet in Barrett's hidden emails, there were references to delaying the family notification and ensuring no loose ends at the hospital. My heart raced as I cross-referenced the documents. With my restored hearing, I could now listen to archived voicemails from that fateful night, messages I'd previously relied on transcripts for. One from the hospital ER. "Ms. Hill, your parents are critical but stable. Please come immediately." But I never got that call in time. Barrett, who was helping with arrangements back then as a new acquaintance, had intercepted it, claiming a mix-up. Now, piecing it together, it was clear Douglas Lee had forged the autopsy to cover up the fact that our parents had survived the initial crash long enough to potentially identify their attackers. Dylan, holed up in a safe house across town to avoid Barrett's spies, joined me via a secure video call. His face, gaunt from years of exile and investigation, filled the screen. "Victoria, look at this," he signed urgently before switching to voice, knowing I could hear now. He'd obtained a copy of the original, unredacted autopsy from a contact in the medical examiner's office, a risky move that involved bribing a low-level clerk. The signature at the bottom, partially erased in our version, was unmistakably Douglas Lee's. "He signed off on it as a witness consultant," Dylan explained, his voice trembling with anger. "But why? He wasn't even in the country, or so we thought." We dug further, using Hill Enterprises' proprietary data forensics tools, the same software our company sold to law enforcement for cyber investigations. I ran keyword searches through Douglas's old correspondence, archived on our servers from his time as co-founder. Emails from a decade ago revealed his growing frustration with our parents' ethical stance. "Garrett, we need to acquire those startups aggressively," one read, Swallow them before they compete. My father's reply, Douglas, we're building a legacy of innovation, not domination. Let's give others a chance. Douglas's responses grew bitter, culminating in a resignation letter. If you won't expand, I'll find my own path overseas. But he hadn't let go. Financial trails showed remittances from European accounts to Barrett's early in our relationship, seed money for the scheme. Douglas had mentored Barrett in business school, grooming him as a pawn. He wanted us out of the way, Dylan said, echoing my thoughts as we pieced it together over coffee in a dimly lit diner, disguises on to evade tails. Mom and Dad's refusal to go ruthless meant Douglas was sidelined. He saw the company as his birthright, stolen by their soft principles. The breakthrough came when I decided to confront Douglas privately. Posing as a vulnerable heiress seeking advice, I invited him to a neutral spot, a quiet cafe in Oakland, away from prying eyes. Mr. Lee, you've been like family, I signed, my hands steady despite the fury inside. He arrived smug, sipping espresso, his silver hair impeccably groomed, exuding the false warmth of a long-lost uncle. As we talked, I secretly activated a recording app on my phone, hidden in my purse. Why return now? I probed. He leaned in, assuming my deafness made me harmless. Victoria, your parents were visionaries but short-sighted. They blocked real growth, acquisitions, market dominance. I suggested expansions, but they shipped me off to Europe. His voice dripped with resentment, the words I'd longed to capture. I had to take matters into my own hands. The accident, it was necessary. With them gone, the company could evolve under proper leadership. Mine. Through Barrett. I fought the urge to lunge across the table. Instead, I signed innocently, but the brakes failed accidentally, right? He laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that chilled me. Accidents can be arranged, dear. Tampered lines, a hired driver to force the swerve, and at the hospital, I ensured no revival. Signed the papers myself to wrap it up quickly. You and Dylan were too grief-stricken to notice. The admission was gold, irrefutable proof on tape. As he rambled on about reclaiming his legacy, I excused myself, heart pounding, and slipped away. Back home, Dylan and I reviewed the recording multiple times, transcribing every damning word. This nails him, Dylan said, his eyes fierce. But we need more, physical evidence to tie it to Barrett. We escalated our efforts. Using anonymous tips, we prompted a re-examination of the crash site photos. Hidden in the wreckage, a device on the brake line, traceable to a European manufacturer linked to Douglas's firms. Bank records showed payments from Barrett to the mechanic involved. It all connected. Douglas masterminded the plot from abroad. Barrett executed locally, delaying my hospital visit to ensure no last words exposed them. With this arsenal of proof, recordings, forgeries, financial trails, we planned the final reveal. Not in a courtroom yet. That would come later. Instead, at the annual Hill Enterprises Gala, a glittering event in a downtown ballroom attended by shareholders, tech moguls, and media. We'll expose them publicly, I decided. Let their downfall be as spectacular as their betrayal. Dylan nodded, and we refined the script. Play the recording, present documents, call in authorities waiting backstage. As the days ticked down, tension mounted. Barrett grew suspicious, shadowing me more. Natalie, demoted and bitter, whispered threats I overheard. But I was ready. No longer the deaf, trusting heiress, but a force of vengeance and justice. The crime against our parents wouldn't go unpunished. Their legacy would be avenged, one revelation at a time. The morning of the board meeting dawned crisp and clear over the San Francisco skyline, the kind of day that promised new beginnings or devastating ends. I arrived at the Hill Enterprises headquarters early, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and resolve. The towering glass building, a symbol of my parents' innovation, loomed above me like a sentinel. For years, it had been my sanctuary, the place where I channeled my grief into growth. Today, it would be the arena for the final confrontation. Dylan met me in the lobby, his face set in determination. "We've got the evidence, Victoria," he whispered, though I could hear him perfectly now, every nuance, every breath. Recordings, documents, the autopsy report, backup. They won't see it coming. We took the elevator to the 20th floor, where the executive boardroom awaited. The room was a testament to modern corporate elegance, a long mahogany table polished to a gleam, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Bay Bridge, but today, the scenery felt ominous, like storm clouds gathering. The board members trickled in, 10 in total, a mix of old loyalists from my parents' era and newer appointees Barrett had swayed with promises of bonuses and perks. Mr. Thompson, a grizzled veteran with a penchant for bow ties, nodded curtly as he sat. Ms. Ramirez, sharp-eyed and ambitious, fidgeted with her tablet. They all knew this meeting was pivotal. Rumors of restructuring had been swirling for weeks. Douglas Lee entered last, flanked by Barrett. Douglas, in his mid-60s, cut an imposing figure with his silver hair and tailored suit from Savile Row. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd built empires, though conveniently forgetting he'd ridden on my parents' coattails. Barrett, ever the charming facade, smiled broadly, but I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Natalie wasn't there. She'd been demoted to handling menial tasks at home, a role reversal I'd orchestrated to keep her close and monitored. As everyone settled, Douglas cleared his throat, his voice booming through the speakers, amplified for my benefit, though I no longer needed it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Douglas began, standing at the head of the table like he owned it, "we're here today to address the future of Hill Enterprises. As many of you know, I've returned from Europe to lend my expertise during this transitional period. Victoria Hill has served admirably as CEO, but given her challenges," he paused, glancing at me with feigned sympathy, "it's time for fresh leadership. Her recent decisions, donating shares to charity, bringing in her long-lost brother, have raised concerns about stability. I propose a vote to oust her from the board and install Barrett Harris as interim CEO, with myself as chairman." Murmurs rippled around the table. Mr. Thompson adjusted his bow tie uncomfortably. He'd been with my parents since the garage days. Ms. Ramirez nodded eagerly. She'd been promised a promotion by Barrett. I sat silently, signing to my interpreter, a trusted ally, for show, but my mind raced. This was the moment. Barrett leaned forward, his voice smooth as silk. "I second the motion. Victoria's dedication is unquestionable, but the company needs someone who can fully engage without limitations. Under my leadership, we'll expand aggressively, acquire competitors, boost profits by 30% in the next quarter." The vote began. Hands raised. One by one, the newer members sided with Douglas and Barrett. It was 6-4 against me when Dylan, who'd been waiting outside, burst through the doors. "Stop this farce," he shouted, slamming a folder onto the table. The room fell silent. Dylan, dressed in a sharp navy suit, looked every bit the prodigal son returned. "I'm Dylan Hill, and I have evidence that this leadership change is built on lies, forgery, and murder." Gasps echoed. Douglas's face drained of color. Dylan distributed copies of documents, bank statements showing embezzlement, email chains between Barrett and Douglas, and the restored autopsy report. "Look here," he pointed. "The brakes on our parents' car were tampered with. Douglas hired the mechanics. Barrett delayed notifications so Victoria couldn't say goodbye. And these transfers? Forged signatures siphoning millions to offshore accounts. Barrett's been bleeding the company dry." Barrett jumped up, his chair scraping loudly. "This is absurd. Fabrications. I deny everything." His voice cracked, betraying him. Douglas remained seated, his eyes narrowing. "Young man, you have no proof. These are baseless accusations." But Dylan smiled grimly. "Oh, I do." He pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the projector. Audio filled the room, recordings from hidden mics I'd planted in Barrett's study in our home. First, Barrett's voice. "Once we have the shares, we eliminate her. The deaf heiress won't suspect." Then Douglas. "Your parents stood in my way, refusing expansions, sending me abroad. Now, the company is mine." The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispers turning to outrage. Ms. Ramirez's face paled. She'd been complicit in minor ways. But murder? That crossed a line. As the recordings played, Natalie entered, uninvited, but right on cue. I'd confronted her privately the night before, offering a deal, testify, and I'd ensure leniency. Terrified of prison, she'd agreed. "It's true," she said, her voice trembling. "Barrett and we were having an affair. He promised me everything once Victoria was gone." Douglas masterminded the crash. I heard them discussing it. Barrett whirled on her. "You traitor! Shut up." But the damage was done. Douglas Lee, the man I had once viewed as a benevolent uncle figure from my parents' stories, rose slowly from his seat. His polished suit and silver hair couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. "This is preposterous," he boomed, his voice echoing off the walls. "These children are grasping at straws to tarnish my name. I built this company with Garrett and Elena. Why would I destroy it?" But Dylan stepped forward, holding up the authenticated autopsy report we'd retrieved just in time. "Because they wouldn't let you turn Hill Enterprises into a cutthroat empire," he said, his voice steady. "You wanted aggressive takeovers, unethical mergers. They said no, so you exiled yourself abroad, plotting your revenge." The room erupted. Mr. Thompson stood, red-faced. "This is criminal. We can't let this stand." Other loyalists nodded. I finally spoke, aloud, for the first time in public since my hearing returned. "Yes, it is criminal, and I can hear every word." The shock was palpable. Barrett staggered back. "What? How?" I explained the miracle briefly, then turned to the board. "I've reclaimed control. Effective immediately, Barrett and Douglas are fired. All forged transactions will be reversed. Police are on their way." The police arrived moments later, sirens wailing faintly outside before officers burst through the doors. I'd tipped them off anonymously hours before, providing the recordings and financial trails. Two burly detectives in plain clothes approached Douglas first. "Douglas Lee, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement," one announced, cuffing him as flashes from photographers lit up the room. Douglas struggled briefly, his face reddening. "You'll regret this, Victoria. I made your parents' dreams reality. You owe me," I signed back, my hands deliberate and calm. "You owe them your life in prison." Barrett was next. He backed away, knocking over a champagne flute that shattered like his illusions. "Victoria, please, mercy. It was all Douglas's idea. I loved you." His plea rang hollow, especially as Natalie bolted for the exit, her high heels clicking frantically. Officers grabbed her mid-stride, her screams echoing, "Let me go! I was coerced!" But her earlier testimony, coerced by our promise of leniency, had already sealed her fate. In the holding cell later that night, as I visited Barrett under police supervision, he begged through the glass. "Sign the divorce without charges. I'll disappear." I pressed the intercom, my voice clear and unwavering for the first time in years. "Justice isn't negotiable, Barrett. You took my trust, my parents' legacy. Now you'll pay with your freedom." The arrests made headlines the next day. Tech heiress exposes murder plot in Hill Enterprises scandal. Shareholders called emergency meetings, pledging loyalty anew. But for me, it was bittersweet. The confrontation had exposed not just their crimes, but the depth of my own naivety. As the squad cars pulled away, I felt a weight lift, yet the scars remained. Dylan hugged me outside. "We did it, sis." Yes, but the real healing was just beginning. 6 months after the gala's explosive revelations, Hill Enterprises stood taller than ever, its San Francisco headquarters buzzing with renewed energy. The stock had rebounded 40%, thanks to our transparent restructuring, ethical AI integrations, and partnerships with startups, honoring my parents' vision of innovation without exploitation. Dylan and I co-led as CEOs, dividing responsibilities. He handled operations, drawing on his investigative skills honed abroad, while I focused on strategy, my restored hearing allowing me to engage in ways I'd long dreamed of. Board meetings were no longer battlegrounds but collaborative forums, with diverse voices from women in tech and underrepresented founders. The transition wasn't seamless. Nightmares of the accident plagued me, vivid flashes of my parents' final moments, the brakes failing on that rainy highway. Therapy helped, as did Dylan's stories from his time away. I traveled Europe, piecing together Douglas's trail. It was lonely, but it made me stronger. We visited our parents' graves often, leaving flowers and sharing updates. "Mom, Dad, we saved the company," I'd whisper, feeling their presence in the wind. Natalie's fate caught up swiftly. She fled to Los Angeles but was arrested for accessory to fraud, her social media empire crumbling under public scrutiny. Barrett and Douglas faced trial. Barrett turned state's evidence for a reduced sentence, but Douglas fought bitterly, his empire of lies collapsing in court. Watching from the gallery, I felt no joy, only closure. "You underestimated me because of my deafness," I testified, my voice steady. But silence taught me to see the truth others miss. Personally, reconciliation came in unexpected ways. Old employees, once swayed by Barrett, apologized in heartfelt emails. We were blind to the manipulation. I forgave, promoting those who showed integrity. Dylan and I rebuilt family traditions, Sunday brunches at the estate, laughing over old photos. "Remember when Dad coded that silly app just for us?" he'd say, easing the pain. Lessons emerged crystal clear. In family businesses, trust must be earned, not assumed. Verify alliances, audit loyalties. My deafness had been a perceived weakness, but it honed my resilience, teaching me that true strength lies in adaptability. Success isn't revenge. It's rising above betrayal to build something enduring. We launched a foundation in our parents' name, funding tech education for the hearing impaired, turning pain into purpose. For anyone navigating similar shadows, feeling undervalued in a legacy business, betrayed by those closest, know this: your story isn't defined by the fall, but the rise. Honesty, vulnerability, and second chances forge real bonds. Have you faced family corporate intrigue? Share below, comment, like, subscribe. Remember, true victory is creating together, not conquering alone.